Okay.
Harding, you're an ordained congregational minister, and you're a medical doctor in a mission clinic in Harding, America, in Argentina. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. And the theme of the interview is the language of light. And we'll be looking at the symbol of the rainbow in the Bible in the light of the amazing things we know about rainbows today. So first of all, can you tell me how you feel when you see a rainbow in the sky after rain?
Well, let me start by saying that I was actually born on a mission field in the middle of a jungle in Brazil, and that was called, that little corner, the rainbow point. Esquina arco-iris in Portuguese. So, but it was snowing in September. That was very unique. So I didn't see a rainbow then, but whenever I see rainbows, and you know, we have lots of them here in Argentina. It rains a lot, and we have waterfalls, and you can see all sorts of numbers of rainbows. And then let me say that I also like to see, and I love to see, the rainbow in the eyes of people. The iris is an ancient Greek name for rainbow. And that is a very interesting thing, that there are rainbows in each one's eyes. And that's lovely too. So I get to see many of them when I look at my patients and in my congregation.
That is fabulous. That's absolutely amazing. I think the rainbow, and I will now never look at anybody's eyes in the same way again. And you're quite right, that is the word for rainbow. That's great.
Yeah.
And I think for many people, the rainbow brings them hope and joy. They see the rainbow in the sky or in a waterfall, as you've mentioned, and it brings a sense of joy and a sense of hope in the future. My mum was saying to me the other day, nobody ever looks at a rainbow and thinks, a rainbow. They look at a rainbow and think, there's a rainbow. But there's much more to the rainbow than this. The spectrum, or the rainbow, has been used to make all sorts of amazing discoveries about our universe. I don't know, maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, that is correct. The spectrum of visible light goes from 400 to 700 nanometers, and we go from the violet to red. But then we have the infrared and the ultraviolet, and the spectrum is an amazing thing, because in sciences you can use it to, for example, study stars and the composition, the chemical composition of a star, depending on the spectrum of light that you get from it. And if you know the substance, Hubble used it to the redshift to describe the cosmology of the redshift, which is he tied the redshift to the expansion of space of the universe. And there's amazing thing. It's related to the Big Bang theory and other things that we have discovered in science. And it's amazing what all can be said and studied through light. And our eyes only see a very small spectrum of that. But for example, in medicine, which is my field, we use X-rays, which is a light frequency of electromagnetic light radiation, which is much lower. The eye can see it. High frequency and the wavelength is shorter, and so you can see it's high energy loaded X-rays. It's used to study the inside of a body by using the property that X-rays are very loaded photons, quantas of energies, and are absorbed in different ways by different materials. So for example, calcium in the bones absorbs it much more than other tissues, and it goes easily through the lungs and things. So you see on the images of an X-ray, the black is the burnt of the image, because a lot of photons impacted there, and because it's quite empty and it's not absorbed. Like a bone would appear white because less photons of the X-rays went through there. And so that's very useful for everyday's practice. I use it every day in our mission clinic too. there are many other. Today we use ultraviolet light for as a sanitary element to disinfect or to prevent transmissions of bacteria or viruses. You know, in this pandemic, the ultraviolet light, which is a short wave, long wavelength light, and it seems to have properties that disrupt DNA molecules of viruses. So that's a very useful thing, especially in our present situation. And there are many more. Say X-rays or Röntgen rays, because it was Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, the German, who discovered those rays. And the first X-ray was of the hand of his wife, and when she saw it, she said, "I have seen my death." Well, so that is a anecdote. But there are also computed tomography, which uses ionizing radiation, which means that it is more energetic. It has it's measured in millisieverts, which is one X-ray has 0.1 millisievert. A tomography uses at least 10 millisieverts. So if you pass 50 millisieverts use it on your body, you have an increased chance to contract some forms of cancer, for example, because they are also able to disrupt molecules, DNA molecules and RNA molecules, etc. So that is why one has to be very careful with this technology. It's very useful, but we should not overuse it because of the risks related to it. We have fluorescent light that shows movement. We have well, there's also the acoustic radiation, which is ultrasound. Yeah, that's very broadly used and less dangerous, less harmful. You have angiography. You know, we study the vascular system through ionizing substances, contrast substances that can visualize structures like thrombosis or other things that have to be treated within arteries and then can be treated with a catheter. Where you look at it and you can go to that point and get the cluster or the thrombose away, destroy it, and so save the patient's life if that, for example, is in the heart. So there are many applications of the light that we don't see, and it still is light. It is electromagnetic radiation of different.
It's like going to the end of the spectrum either side, and these things are on the same spectrum, so to speak.
Yeah. They are outside the spectrum of visible light. So we can see an X-ray or ultraviolet light, but they're still, they are part of the electromagnetic spectrum of light. And because light includes not just the visible light that we can see, those wavelengths from 400 to 700 nanometers, more or less. But there's also X-rays, gamma rays, there's microwaves, and there's radio waves, which are part of the electromagnetic spectrum of light. So there's so many more things that do exist and are very useful and sometimes harmful, but we didn't know until very recent years compared with the history of humanity. It's just something that we just discovered 1 century ago or so, and yeah.
I wanted to ask about. You mentioned ultraviolet and its healing properties, as well as the damaging properties, which we know if we've been out in the sun.
It has damaging properties in the sense that it can damage, for example, skin, producing melanoma, because it's a high energy loaded particle of short wavelength, but it's absorbed to a great extent, 95%, by the ozone layer. You know, in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, actually. So a small part of it, UVA, UVB, and UVC rays. There are 3 types of
Yeah.
UVA and UVB are the most dangerous because UVC almost don't get to our planet. They are stopped there. But you know, with the ozone layer going thinner and the whole ozone hole, you know, it's more frequent. We see many more cases of melanoma in recent years than we had seen in the 50 years ago, say. So that's an indicator also of how we treat our planet.
Yes.
Because it's a direct result of the greenhouse gases and so on. Yeah. So
And then
yes,
when we go, if somebody gets cancer or and they go for radiotherapy, is that the same sort of thing? Are they using? Is it waves in the same spectrum that are being used to heal? Then
radiotherapy is also a radiation that comes from the nucleus of unstable atoms that are different cesium, different uses different kinds of atoms, and on but it also it is still is a radiation that is composed by waves and particles because it's loaded. When it impacts, it creates a photon, what Einstein called the photon, which is that dual nature of light. It's being a wave and also a particle, and both are correct. So then this radiation is up to, or is meant to, destroy tissues that are very fastly replicating, like in a cancer, which are and this property is very useful in that case, but it has to be focalized on a certain area because it's also, it can be dangerous if just used in any part of the body. It has to be locally focused on the tumor itself.
Then we may come back to this, but there's another experience that I had when I came out to Argentina with a group there. So we will come back to the more serious stuff, but this is quite serious too because it links maybe the way we look at the rainbow and light and all the use of light you've been talking about with our Christian faith. And that is, we went, you and I and a group of people walked along to Iguazu Falls, which is a fantastic place. And I hope I'm going to put some pictures up with this when this is broadcast next week online. And we went and stood and we looked up at the falls, and there were, as you said, rainbows over the falls, magnificent, wonderful rainbows. And what struck us as we were all standing there in a row gazing up at the rainbow is that each of us had his or her own personal rainbow, because everyone was standing in this place, their own place, and they were looking up at the raindrops falling, and each of us had a different perspective, so we were seeing a different rainbow. And I can remember that striking me with great force, that although we were sharing the experience, for each of us it was slightly different. And I remember turning to you and saying, we've all got our own personal rainbow.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I used to go again and again to the falls, because one of the things that is always different, well, it's the rainbows. And there's you know, I showed you this little fall that has like a narrow gorge going down, and when it's noon and the light comes from the back, because the sunlight has to come from the back to see the rainbow in a certain angle, 42 degrees. So and then in the contrast with the deep dark gorge of the fall, you have this wonderful little rainbows. I once counted up to 17. Of course, the person beside me may have a different count. And so this is a wonderful experience and a humbling experience, because one has to understand that what I see is not the same thing that the other guy sees, and the other guys can see things that I don't see. Actually, a rainbow is not a physical object. It cannot be physically approached, but it's formed in our mind that is able to see colors. If you see a black and white picture, you would see any rainbow there. So it's a human capacity to differentiate these different wavelengths and to translate it into colors. So we have that capacity to see different colors. That's a good, wonderful thing about us humans, that we can see nuances and things, but we have to accept that those can be seen and located in different places by different people, especially for Christians, that we will never see the whole thing and the whole beauty that is in it. And starting with the fact that what we see is such a narrow spectrum of light, and that most of it is outside of our sight. It's also a very humbling experience, and it's a wonderful experience and a blessing.
That's very
that is that way, and not that we all see the same thing. That would be boring.
And we can learn from each other of what your rainbow is like, and you can tell me, and I respect your rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because I haven't put this on our list, so you are a doctor and a minister, and you've been talking about how you care for your patients, how you look into their eyes, how you use the various technologies at your disposal to heal and to diagnose. And I wonder what it is that brings your faith and your scientific knowledge and your care for your patients all together. Is it fair to ask you that?
Absolutely. You're not the first person to ask me that. I've get that question all over the years, and as though some people, even with the, I sense why are you doing this? It has nothing to do. And for me, it has everything to do with each other, because God does not compete with science. That is what I think, that is one of these little rainbows I see. God does not compete. He is the condition for science to be possible. There is only one source of truth, which is God, whether it says in the Bible or it says somewhere else, or Einstein says it or Darwin says it. That's absolutely not a problem. And I think we should and appreciate what you are doing with this interview. And I hope that it will help many people, especially Christians, who have a hard time with accepting this and have this false dilemma of either God or science. And that is not the case. There would be no science without God. And I am trying to, perhaps I should mention Alfred North Whitehead. That would make the idea more comprehensible. He said in Process and Reality, well, God and the world implicate each other. The vision and the physical experience need each other, have the same rights to priority in our reality. So it is not either or, like the light is wave and particle. It's not either or, it's both. And Niels Bohr, when he discovered that and realized that that was so, he said, there might be deeper truth where opposites do not are true at the same time. So being a Christian and a scientist should actually not be a problem. And I think you have a university in England, I think it's Cambridge, who has that logo in Latin, Dominus Illuminatio Mea. Yeah, that's the first words of Psalm 27 in the Vulgata Latin. Yehva ori varishim mi ira in Hebrew. God is the light. Yeah, it's my light. So, and that is not absolutely a problem for me. It never has been. And I accepted this interview to contribute a little bit with this opening the mind of people that this is a possibility that at least should think about, that we don't have to choose either science or God, but that both things work together to increase our understanding of the world, of ourselves, and of course of God himself, because it's all part of his truth and light that shines in our lives. That is why I work on both fields.
Hallelujah. The last thing then is coming back to what we mentioned earlier. I just wondered what you think might still be left to be discovered about the way this amazing thing, the spectrum of light and radiation and electromagnetic radiation, all those things, what is there still to be discovered?
Well, I think we are kind of like alpinist climbing up the Everest. We just reached the first steps. We just started. we don't know where this can lead us. I mean, we are talking electromagnetic radiation, but there is also talks about other theories like superstrings and the quantum gravity, and all this. There's a major thing that we need to put together, which is gravity and quantum physics. And if we can get this unified theory, we'll be able to explain much more of the universe, but we don't have it. So I think there is an infinity of possible knowledge, and that I think that we are on the right path. Science is, of course, correct. It's a description, but not an explanation of existence. I think it describes it very well, but to explain it, you have to say why and why not. So this is a very simple question Heidegger rose and others: why do things exist, and why rather not? Doesn't have an answer in science, and doesn't have to, because it's not the topic of science. So it's like you have a cake and you have scientists studying this cake, and they can say hundreds of thousands of things about this cake, but they don't know how it came into existence. You ask Julia, and she can tell you in a minute, I'd made it, and this different kinds of answers, the faith answer and the science answer. They're not contradictory. And I don't know how much there is to discover, but there is so many. There's dark matter, dark energy, the colliders that have been built. We don't know what they will produce with the quarks of light and other. So I think I'm very intrigued and curious about what the future will teach us, and I look forward to it. But I think we should also, on the other hand, say that science is, as it is a wonderful thing, we should reflect about the ethics of how to use it, because it can be used in both ways, to do good and to do harm. And the bigger the more it increases in its capacity and technology related to it, the bigger the harm or the good it can do. So we have to lead this process somehow. What is allowed to do, and how far should we go in a certain direction? Otherwise, if we would produce things like nuclear weapons, or keep doing that, and it will destroy ourselves. So we can foster life or do the opposite. It depends on us. And I think we have to think about it, especially as theologians. We have to speak a word about this.
It's like the question that's posed at the end of Deuteronomy 30 or thereabouts, that you hear, I set before you two pathways, life and death. Choose life. And that's part of the covenant promise. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one wonderful chapter.
God's promise in the rainbow keeps on calling us onwards and calling us onwards.
Yeah.
That's
well, that chapter 7 to 9 and chapter 9 of Genesis, where there's the Keshet Yehweh, the ark, the rainbow, the ark of Yehweh, was actually the name for a warrior's ark, but used for peace. This re-signifying of this symbol of the ark, the bow, the warrior's bow, the bow, into a rainbow, into something that lifts the curse that was in humanity. God says, there is no more curse. I will not destroy life. And he puts it in the middle, in between the heaven and earth, so that I can see it and be reminded, God says. That's a kind of funny part of that. But yes, that it's a sign of hope, that in spite of bad things that happen, like wars and destruction, still there is a God that is a God of life. And this is this covenant that comes at the end of the flood account. I think that's quite different than what the accounts we have from the ancient Babylon, Gilgamesh and others, that they don't end in a covenant, but Genesis ends in the covenant with all life. And that's wonderful. It's so inclusive. And yeah, I like to read that story over and over again, because it's really a story that should be it's lifting, because it lifts curses. It gives a new chance, a new start, a new beginning, and it's wonderful. I love it. Yeah.
Amen to that. That's absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much, Harding.